Welcome back everyone, it's Crazy Walder. In today's video I'm going to be going over a really awesome combination for getting your old consoles to look really good. Now I've done a video on this before, and specifically in terms of how to improve your console graphics, and this was using the following two items. So it uses the mCable Classic, which you can see right here. Now this came out more or less recently, I believe sometime in 2019. And essentially what this unit does is it does a little bit of upscaling, some anti-aliasing on the image that is presented with, and also it does a little bit of color reproduction in order to actually get the colors to pop just a little bit more. And then paired to that is the Darbee DVP-5000S. This unit has been used in projectors, Blu-ray players, among other different units, in order to basically increase the color depth of the image. Specifically, it does so on a pixel per pixel basis in order to essentially give the image a little bit more pop, a little bit more definition. And when you combine these two units together, essentially you get an improvement in image quality that otherwise would only be reserved for some kind of internal upscaler, a software-based upscaler, or specifically if you're just using better hardware, such as, for example, to emulate something in order to get the graphics to bump up quite a significant amount. But this does it all in one essentially fell swoop, and really doesn't add a whole lot of additional latency into the mix. Now I can't say that it will necessarily allow you to play all your fighting games with the smoothest amount of input latency, but with that said, most shooters that I've played have performed just fine. Most basic games that do require timed button inputs work just as well with this too, and while I can't really give you guys solid numbers on how well this works, Linus Tech Tips has a pretty great video of how much chaining different units in addition to the base HDMI cable can affect latency. And what they've mostly found is that almost regardless of how many units there are in the chain, it doesn't necessarily add that much extra. So with that said, let's take a look at some different video segments specifically here for the PS Vita that make this particular combination really stand out. Now, the mCable Classic has been advertised primarily for the Switch. This is what they target, and it works really great on the Switch. I definitely recommend it for anybody who's a Switch user, and I will have a video incoming that'll also take a look at some Switch games using this combination in here. But for now, I do want to take a look at the Vita. Specifically, I'll be using the Vita TV, because I think this really represents sort of the older generation of consoles that will benefit the most from this kind of combo. Now, I would say that the 360 and PlayStation 3 consoles are the ones that stand the most to gain using a combination like this. But with that said, pretty much anything that's in the 720p kind of area, 720p to 1080p will benefit greatly from this particular combo being chained together back to back in order to give the image a bit more clarity, to also upscale just a little bit and get rid of the jaggies that would otherwise be present because the engine doesn't happen to have a good anti-aliasing solution in place. So let's take a look, and you can decide for yourselves whether or not this is something that's going to be worth it to you. have it, you can take a look and see the differences between basically just a straight HDMI output or direct output versus using something like the Darbee and the mCable Classic. Now, you don't have to get the mCable Classic, you can also just get the original mCable Gaming Edition. That will work just as well. Either one of them will allow you to do a certain amount of upscaling and also, jaggy reduction. However, the mCable Classic, I believe, is a better choice for somebody who has a lot of older consoles and they're stable. If, for example, you are still rocking the Gamecube, you've got a PlayStation 2, original Xbox, if you have a Dreamcast, for example, even N64, all of those consoles are going to benefit greatly from having the mCable Classic basically enabled, because one of the great things that it does is it has a pass-through mode that will actually enhance the 480p output without stretching it out to the widescreen resolutions that are so common today. Now, I'm not going to say that, you can't go with, for example, a different HDMI output for the specific consoles. There are many different variants for that kind of stuff out there today, and it's up to you if you want to go that route. Obviously, you will need some kind of HDMI input into the mCable Classic regardless, whether that be via an AV pack, or you're doing some kind of mod that allows the HDMI output or a cable, for example, such as the ones that have come out now for the PlayStation, the GameCube, the Xbox. All of these are available on the market in some way, shape, or form. Now, with that said, however, you do have to keep in mind that this isn't like some kind of silver bullet that is going to improve all games across the board. It is also not a solution that is going to somehow magically transform, what you're seeing on screen. However, what it does do really well, and in my opinion, this is probably its biggest selling point, is that it does enough cleanup around text in certain images to the point where if you're using a modern HD TV for your gaming, especially for all of your consoles, it just makes everything a lot sharper, a lot easier to read, and specifically in titles where you need to read text. If you're scrolling through books, you're trying to read some kind of lore, this will be a huge boon for you to have, because again, it just sharpens everything. It gives a little bit more definition, and it does really good upscaling. Now, this is on the mCable side. If you also happen to get the Darbee unit, which I have, this will also allow you to basically get back some of that kind of perspective that you typically don't get in a lot of these games, because you have what I would like to call kind of fog of war, where some of the distant objects tend to be kind of blurred out, or they're not necessarily as apparent. Also, things like picture frames or anything in regards to separate objects on walls that tend to stick out when you run things in a higher resolution are not going to be as apparent on older consoles. But when you use the Darbee unit or the DVP-5000, as I was referring to it earlier, you're actually going to get those details back, because it happens to clean up a lot of that, again, on a pixel by pixel basis. Basically, it does a lot of that correction for you, sort of pulling the details back out to make the images just basically stand out a little bit more. Now, I'm not saying, again, that it's the end-all be-all solution for everything, but as you saw from this PS Vita comparison specifically, it does do a really good job on these older consoles, and it will do an even better job as you move up in the console generation. So the 360 and PlayStation 3 era games will benefit significantly, but as will the early gen Xbox One and PlayStation 4 consoles before they got the updates to the Slim or Pro versions later on, in the Xbox case the One X, for example. But all of these will benefit from the reduction in the aliasing that you see on screen, and you'll also see a pretty good reduction in terms of the overall blurriness of the image. Now, the specific algorithm that is used on the mCable Plus, I'm not 100% clear on, but unlike a lot of the FXAA solutions that are out there that apply a kind of Vaseline blur across the entire screen, while they do reduce the overall kind of jaggedness of the whole image, they don't do a particularly good job of making the image look nice and crisp. Now, this is the exact opposite of what the Darbee and the mCable Classic do, as well as the mCable Gaming Edition. All they simply do is do an edge detection, which then effectively blurs just along the edges itself, but doesn't affect the overall picture, meaning that you get a reduction in the basically polygon view that you typically would associate with a lot of the jaggies from a really poor anti-aliasing solution or a lack of anti-aliasing completely. However, it does end up rendering some of those object lines a little bit more blurry than you would expect. However, I think overall, when you run the units side by side, you will see a pretty good improvement in picture quality across the board. And the Darbee unit does have a number of different modes that you can select that will let you tune the amount of kind of blurring or sharpening that is applied to the image, so you can get some sharpening back from the AA filter that's on the mCable Classic stock. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I will be doing a comparison for the Switch next, and then I'll try and do a couple of 360 and PlayStation 3 comparisons after that. So stick around for the next video where I'll do the comparison using this exact setup in more consoles.